Change is coming to college football in 2024. Change that I think is going to benefit Shane Beamer and South Carolina's football program.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I am Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also a staff writer for Gamecock Digest over on Fan Nation. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team here today. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play Store. We got a lot to dive into on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. We're going to talk a lot of football. We're going to talk about the new helmet comm rules that are coming to the sport and why Shane Beamer and South Carolina's football staff could benefit from that rule change more than others. We'll also talk about an interesting question that was brought by 107.5 The Game just a couple days ago. What is the current relevancy for South Carolina on a national scale? We'll dive into that question, and at the end, we'll talk about the outlook for South Carolina's baseball team when you look ahead at the rest of the season. All that on today's Locked On Gamecocks. But let's start off with the rule changes that have come down from the NCAA regarding the sport of college football. As beginning in the 2024 season, FBS football teams now have the option to use helmet comms during a football game. Basically mean that they can choose one player on offense and one player on defense to talk to one of their staff members. I'm assuming that they are going to be allowed to talk to the offensive and defensive play callers. And so that way, it's supposed to help mitigate the potential for sign stealing. Obviously, we all know what happened with Michigan last year and that entire scandal, which kind of really gave this a lot of momentum. The idea that there needs to be a rule change made so that maybe we don't run into a situation like that ever again. And I think that with these new helmet comm rules, South Carolina is going to benefit from this more than other programs. You might be wondering, well, why is it you think that? Well, South Carolina has a ton of NFL experience on their coaching staff. The most obvious sort of example when you look at the NFL experience this staff possesses is offensive coordinator Dowell Loggains, who spent 16 years in the NFL as a coach, and 7 of those years were spent as an offensive play caller. So Dowell Loggains, this is not going to be some massive adjustment for him whatsoever. He is used to this. Granted, it has been a few years since he's had to go through an NFL play calling like scenario or style, but I'm sure it won't take him too long to take off all the rust and get right back into the groove of things. You look at that along with Lenore Sellers coming back into this football program for the second straight year. Things have slowed down for him, as he has stated throughout the spring. So last year, it probably felt like that he was drinking water from a fire hydrant. This year, not so much. So because of that, the fact that even though you got a new starter, you have a guy that's been in your system for at least a year now, that should also help things move along more efficiently on the offensive side. And by the way, along with the new helmet comm rules, teams can now have up to 18 tablets. They can use them, I believe, in the press box where the other coaches are at, maybe some off-field analysts. They can also use them on the sidelines as well. And anyone that's associated with the team can use those tablets. One of the other coaches on the offensive staff is a Mike Fury, who just a few years ago was the wide receivers coach for the Chicago Bears. And so Mike Fury, he spent a couple years in the new era of the NFL where they use Microsoft tablets to help them kind of diagnose plays, see what happened previously, and try to adjust accordingly. that could help South Carolina as well, because Dowell Loggains, as we all know from last season, he likes to call plays in the press box. He likes to have a bird's eye view of everything that's going on. I imagine he's going to lean heavily on a Mike Fury when it comes to communicating things. Hey, what are you seeing down there? What are you seeing on the tablet? And that is something that's going to help Dowell Loggains out, because he's going to be able to lean on Mike Fury to give him that information during a football game, so he does not have to divert all of his attention towards what's happened previously, and he can focus on, what he needs to look ahead at for the next drive. Now, switching things over to the defensive side of the ball. Clayton White, unlike Dowell Loggains, he does not have NFL experience. However, he has a couple of assistants on his side of the ball that have NFL experience. Defensive backs coach Torian Gray is one of them, spent 2 years with the Washington Commanders just a few years back. And then Sterling Lucas, he was an NFL assistant for 6 seasons, 5 of them with the Baltimore Ravens, and the last one with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He can lean on those two guys to help him when it comes to, hey, how did y'all communicate with the headset? He can also probably use Dowell Loggains as a source of guidance as well. So the point here is Clay White does not have direct experience using helmet comms, but he can lean on these other guys to sort of help him get there. And much like Mike Fury with Dowell Loggains, he can let Sterling Lucas and Torian Gray be the two guys that use the tablets a lot more. So again, he does not have to worry about looking back on plays while also trying to think ahead to, okay, what should I be thinking about with the next drive, with this next quarter, with the way the game's going, with how the offense is playing? He's got a lot that he's already got to process. It will help him that he's got other guys who have been NFL assistants, who have used tablets in the past, in Torian Gray and Sterling Lucas, that can do all of that for him, at least with their respective position groups, while he's trying to think of all those other things. And then here's the other part. Joe DeCamillis, the new special teams coordinator for South Carolina, he also has a bevy of NFL experience. He has spent 14 years of his coaching career as a special teams coordinator at the NFL level. Now, admittedly, while we know that helmet comms will be installed for both the offensive and defensive sides of the ball, I don't know how that's going to work with special teams. I'm not sure if that's something that they're going to allow. I'm not sure if it's something that they actually want to utilize for special teams. But if they are able to use that, then I do have to think that Joe DeCamillis, again, he's going to transition just fine. He's only been out of the NFL game for 1.5 years now at this point. So it's not going to take him long to get right back in the swing of things if he's indeed allowed to use helmet comms for special teams. So think about that when going into next season. Sure, you're going to face coaching staffs like the Georgia Bulldogs, who obviously have plenty of coaches on that staff that have been in the NFL at some point in time. But South Carolina, at least early on in the year, if they seem like they're ahead of the game against Kentucky or against maybe an LSU, part of the reason might be because they've adjusted to the helmet comm system that's been installed by the NCAA a lot faster than those two coaching staffs. And it could be vital for this team as they look to get back to the postseason in 2024. And obviously, they need to get back to a bowl game because they went 5-7 this past season. There's been some talk recently about the fact that, South Carolina took a couple steps backwards in 2023. And 107.5 The Game, basically the lead radio station for South Carolina sports talk here in the Midlands and in the city of Columbia, they posed an interesting question on Twitter or X the other day regarding what's the national relevancy for South Carolina's football program at this moment in time? In essence, trying to get your thoughts. So we're going to dive into that question a little bit more in a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. It is playoff time in the NBA, NHL, and baseball season is in full swing. So FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. The Atlanta Braves are off to a hot start here in the Major League Baseball season as they're currently 16-6 overall and have the second best winning percentage in all of Major League Baseball. But FanDuel still has their World Series odds set kind of low compared to where they're at right now, as the Braves odds are currently set at plus 480, which is second behind the Los Angeles Dodgers, with their odds being set at plus 320. So A little bit interesting sort of contrast there, considering the fact that the Braves right now are outperforming the Los Angeles Dodgers. If you think the Braves are going to win it all, might be a good prop bet to look at right there. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first watch, wherever you get your audio podcasts daily, your first listen, I should say, or your first watch on YouTube. All right, let's move on from that and talk about the national relevancy for South Carolina's football program. As I mentioned just a couple moments ago, 107.5 The Game, they made a poll question on X a couple days ago, and the question just simply asked, where do you think the South Carolina Gamecocks stand from a relevancy standpoint on a national scale when it comes to their football program? And they gave you 4 different options: very relevant, moderately relevant, somewhat relevant, or completely irrelevant. Right now, the top answer choice for people who have answered that question is somewhat relevant, which sits at 43%. The second most popular answer choice right now is irrelevant, which stands at 34%. So let's dive into this question a little bit more. First of all, let me know in the comment section on YouTube what you think about this question. As far as my answer goes, I think that the correct answer right now is somewhat relevant. So I do agree with the majority that have gotten behind that answer choice for this question because, look, I think right now it is fair to say South Carolina does benefit a great deal from the fact that they are in the SEC. One, right now, they have security in their conference. They're not in the ACC, and sitting there every day and night wondering what is their future going to look like, because Clemson and Florida State, obviously, with each passing week and month, it seems more and more likely that at some point down the road, whether it's a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, they will be leaving the ACC. And once that happens, the ACC is going to collapse from a national relevancy standpoint. And other programs, they might fall by the wayside. They'll have to find a new home. Maybe they'll be relegated automatically to the group of 5 level, which is already seeing a greater divide between their conferences and the Power 4 conferences. So South Carolina is definitely benefiting from that. The fact they are just an SEC program, it makes them somewhat relevant because of the changes that this conference is going through, the amount of talent that this conference has in every single sport from top to bottom. It's one of the best decisions that this athletic department has ever made. The fact that South Carolina made the decision to go to the SEC in the early 90s and were accepted, it is the best move the school has ever made in terms of athletics. Now, I do understand that the fact that South Carolina went 5-7 last year, obviously that hurts you from a relevancy standpoint. As we talked about several times in the past on this show, South Carolina is not a program. Their football program is not a program that can get away with having multiple subpar seasons in a row and still get talked about to a significant degree on the national scale. A team in this conference that has had that happen and still gets talked about a good amount is the Florida Gators. I mean, Billy Napier, I don't think they made it to a bowl game this past season. And then 2 seasons ago, they finished the year 6-7 and had a horrendous end to their season. Now they're going to year 3. A lot of people think that they're probably going to have another losing season just simply because of the schedule. And Billy Napier, very likely, is fighting for his job at this point. But despite all that, Florida still gets talked about a lot because it's Florida. They've won national championships. They've done it in a very different way. The fun and gun with Steve Spurrier in the 90s. Obviously, the success they had in the late 2000s under Urban Meyer. They've done it in controversial ways. They've done it in ways where they have scored 50-plus points on you, and they rubbed it in your face after they won the game. So South Carolina, they don't have that historical success to lean on when they fall on rough times. And so, yes, 2 years ago, South Carolina had the best back-to-back win stretch of any college football team that season, defeating Tennessee and Clemson at the end of the regular season to go to 8-4, then going to the Gator Bowl and taking that game down to the wire with a historically known brand in collegiate athletics and quite frankly across the world in the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and losing that game despite their best efforts. They had done a lot of good for themselves that season. Unfortunately, though, last season, they kind of saw all that go away right before their very eyes because of the way that they performed throughout the season. So, South Carolina, I would say if you ask this question going into last year, considering the fact you had Spencer Rattler coming back and all the success you had the previous season late, you could have said South Carolina was moderately relevant. But after going 5-7, you drop a whole level because of that. Again, South Carolina can't afford to do that. And that's why we sit here and say that simply because of perception, South Carolina's got to make it back to the postseason. They've got to go bowling again. Whether they go 6-6, 7-5, 8-4, doesn't really matter. Well, maybe it matters if they go 8-4. If they go 8-4, quite frankly, I think that Shane Beamer would maybe have a chance to win Coach of the Year considering all the circumstances. But as long as you make it back to a bowl game, then you're at least getting back on track. And I do think, again, Shane Beamer has learned from some of the mistakes that they made the past couple years, maybe kind of overlooking some problems and letting them fester to a point where it was blatantly obvious to everyone how bad the situation was in certain areas. Maybe now he's learned from those mistakes. And maybe from this point forward, the next time that they do something like they did against Tennessee and Clemson in 2022, they'll make sure to take advantage of it fully and not just basically ride that high horse for the next 12 months, which is in a way what they did. And now, obviously, again, they're back to having to fight for national relevancy once again. So, in a long-winded story, my whole point here is this. I think the program is somewhat relevant right now. Again, feel free to give your thoughts in the comment section on YouTube. And also go answer the question for 1075 The Game on X. I believe the poll is still going on at this moment in time as well. So very interesting question that was brought up by those guys. And I do think it's a question that obviously has to be answered in a different way, positively, this next year if Shane Beamer and this staff obviously wants to stick around for the long haul and see the fruits of their labor. Now, a couple people the other day said, Andrew, why don't you talk about the baseball team? Or they want to hear me talk about the baseball team. And I haven't talked about the baseball team a bunch throughout this season, but you know what? I decided, hey, don't have a whole lot else I can really discuss right now. So in the third segment, you know what? We will talk about the baseball team, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. I don't think some of you are going to like what I have to say. We'll talk about all that in a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Yes, I have a competitive side. We all do. And my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. And I'm sure you've heard it at this point. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you can play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is messing with my friends. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties, just like the classic Monopoly game, but now I can also heist their vaults of riches for myself. And the leaderboard showed me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in timed tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends by downloading Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play Store. Today's show is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is now an authorized ticket place of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier than before. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. And you can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for games at the ballpark. Talked about this on our show the other day. The Braves have their series finale against the Miami Marlins later tonight at 7:20 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time in Truist Park. You can find tickets for as cheap as $10 a piece. And Ronald Acuna has a special commemorative bobblehead being given to the first 15,000 fans that get to the ballpark that commemorates his 73 stolen base season that he had in 2023. So if you want to see the Braves likely sweep the Marlins and also get a Ronald Acuna bobblehead at the same time, tonight's game is a good one to go to. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, welcome back to today's edition, this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in just 30 minutes. Okay, let's talk about South Carolina's baseball team here for the last few minutes of today's show. South Carolina's baseball team obviously coming off a tough series loss to the Arkansas Razorbacks this past weekend, losing the first game 2-1, coming back and winning game 2, but losing game 3, what was a doubleheader situation this past Saturday. I believe the final score of that game was 9-6. Pitching just kind of fell apart a little bit. Fielding was not great that game, and the batting line just could not wake up early enough, and so it led to a series loss for Mark Kingston and his group. Here's what I'm going to go ahead and say about this baseball team. This is a team that struggles to put together a complete game, and in my opinion, that is going to hurt them down the road this season. When you look at South Carolina's team stats to this point in the year and just compare them to the rest of the SEC, and I get it, that might not be fair to the team because comparing it to the SEC, I mean, it's like comparing it to Major League Baseball clubs because the SEC, it's like its own minor league system with just how deep the conference is in terms of individual talent, coaching talent, you name it. But to this point in the year, South Carolina has the second to worst batting average in the entire SEC. They're batting .266 as an entire team. I don't think any of us would have guessed that would have been the case when this season began. In terms of ERA, the pitching staff has put together the 7th best ERA in the conference to this point. So dead middle of the pack right there. Team ERA of 4.44. And then fielding percentage, the team is 8th in the SEC with a fielding percentage of 97.6%. And I believe they've committed 34 errors to this point in the season, which is around 1 error per game. So not terrible, but not exactly great at the same time. Here's my overall point. This Arkansas series this past weekend, it's a great example of the inability of this team to put together a complete performance. The batting lineup does not do its job. Let's just be honest. They had 5 or 6 chances with 2 runners on base, 1 out, 2 outs, sometimes no outs being recorded by Arkansas, and only managed to get 1 run out of all those situations. And I know people could just turn around and say, well, Andrew, they were going up against Hagen Smith, who might not be the best pitcher in all of college baseball. I understand that. But they had plenty of opportunities to get some runs home and break the game open in terms of the pitcher's duel that was going on between both teams on Friday night. They couldn't get it done. The second game, South Carolina did manage to play more of a complete game. Wasn't able to watch the majority of it, but I kept up with it on my phone while I was at a family gathering and saw that South Carolina, again, they were able to capitalize in that performance. But then game 3 comes. Pitching staff's already whittled down to a few arms because you're now playing your 3rd game basically in 24 hours. I believe that Dylan Eskew started things off, and I feel really bad for Dylan Eskew because, listen, he has had his struggles this season. He has struggled with his consistency in his starts, mainly when he faces a batting lineup the second time around. This past start that he had, in all honesty, was probably the best start that he had all season outside of maybe his start against Clemson. And the fielding behind him failed him. Made multiple mistakes, led to, I believe, 3 runs in the 2nd or 3rd inning. And Arkansas, from that point on, they held on to the momentum. South Carolina kind of came back. They chipped at the lead a little bit, had another just kind of fielding blunder at home plate where they could have probably thrown out a guy at home, but Dalton Reeves was not able to corral what was basically just a fireball of a throw from Ethan Petrie in right field. And again, South Carolina, the bats woke up late, but it was too little too late at that point. They lost the game 9-6. And this schedule is not going to get any easier for South Carolina. They just played the number 2 team in the country in Arkansas, right? This weekend, they're playing number 4 Kentucky at home. And that should honestly tell you where this baseball program is at this point. South Carolina is fighting to be a regional host. Kentucky is a top 5 team. What are we doing here? Kentucky, I'm going to tell you right now, sure, they probably don't wow teams in any facet, but they are fundamentally sound. They're going to make you pay if you make mistakes. They're going to basically probably win that series because they're going to do all the little things right more often than South Carolina. So the Gamecocks, in my opinion, you've got to win that series. Okay, if you want to be regional host, you have to. The next series is at Missouri. You should beat those guys, but Missouri has given South Carolina fits the past couple years. Last year, I think they swept them, but every game went down to the wire. And then 2 years ago, I think that they lost the series 2-1. They may have even gotten swept in Columbia, Missouri. So the Tigers, that's not going to be an easy outing for South Carolina is my overall point. Then they play number 20, Georgia, the second to last weekend series of the season. And then they finish the regular season at number 3, Tennessee for a 3-game series. Probably not going to have a chance to win that one. So in my opinion, you cannot lose to Missouri. Okay, let's just go ahead and get that out of the way. You can't lose to them. You need to beat Georgia at home. You need to beat Kentucky at home, in my opinion. If you can do all three of those things, even if you get swept in an ugly way by Tennessee, you're probably in a position where you can host depending on what you do in the SEC baseball tournament. But y'all, this baseball program, I would say it's kind of at a crossroads because Mark Kingston, he's had some success here, but obviously compared to the standard that this program has, historically speaking, I don't think that success has exactly matched what the expectation is. He is now in his 6th full season, I want to say, as the head coach because COVID obviously happened in 2020. It's his 7th year as the manager overall. And I just don't think there's a lot to show for it. And coming into this season, this team had expectations of at least making it back to the Super Regionals and the ceiling being going back to Omaha because of the batting line. The batting lineup has been the worst part of this team throughout the entire season. Again, I don't think anybody would have said that going into the year. So if you don't even host a regional and say you go to someone else's ballpark, you get knocked out in 2-3 games, whatever the case may be, and you don't even make it to the super regional round, some tough questions have got to be asked at this point because this was supposed to be one of the best teams that, quite frankly, they'd ever had. And I get it. Pitching staff, completely new crop of guys just about. But they are at least still middle of the pack in what is a very deep SEC this season. Your batting lineup has not been consistently good enough. It's honestly been the downfall for this team in several games. That's the most concerning part. The unit that was supposed to be your best on this team has turned out to be your worst. And I don't think that's necessarily on the players. And I'll leave it at that. So, point being, there's a reason why I have not talked about this baseball team a whole lot because, quite frankly, they haven't given you much reason to talk about them since SEC play has began. Men's basketball has, women's basketball has, football having their spring game. So look, I will keep up with them. Don't get me wrong, y'all. I will. But right now, this baseball team, they've got a lot of questions they've got to answer and not a whole lot of time left to do it. So we'll see what they do this weekend against the Wildcats and what they'll have to do maybe afterwards going forward. With that being said, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Hope that y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show. What are your thoughts on helmet comps for the football team? Do you think South Carolina is going to benefit from that more than other teams because of the NFL experience that they have on their coaching staff? What are your thoughts on the Gamecocks' current national relevancy in football? Do you think that they're somewhat relevant or do you think they're irrelevant right now? And lastly, what is your overall thought and outlook for the baseball team throughout the rest of this season? Let me know in the comment section on YouTube or shoot me a direct message on X at @ALion_SC. But with that being said, that's going to do it for today's show. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, and I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.